Today, I want to tell you about the top 7 interview red flags that you need to be aware of, whether you're an applicant or a person doing the selection in the applicant review process. So, these are actually pretty deadly. So, definitely pay attention to them. I'm going to go over each of them one by one, give you an overview very quickly. Then, we're going to discuss in depth why they're red flags, and then maybe we'll give you some bonus tips also as well. So stick until the very end. So I'll give you some of those bonus red flags as well, if you may. Now, before I get into these, I'd like to perhaps maybe introduce myself, introduce my co-host. My name is Behrouz Momeni. I'm the CEO and founder here at BMO. And I'm joined with my co-host today, Ronza, who is our director of consulting. Ronza, thanks for joining me today.
That's awesome to be here. I'm excited.
And a really quick, very quick, before we jump into this, what is this? This is, you've joined us for the One Question podcast. If you've never watched any of these, we usually take one topic, dissect it in many different forms to give you as much of the tips we've discovered, as part of our own processes normally. If you like this, obviously share it with a friend. If you have any questions, comment, and of course, subscribe in whatever social media channel you're watching this. So let's go right into it. What are the top 7 interview red flags? Let's go and give you an overview one by one. 1, poor introduction. 2, having a lot of filler words like like. 3, sounding too political and beating around the bush instead of answering the question. 4, blaming others for past poor self experience at another place, location, or activity or experience. 5, unconvincing or dishonest explanation for any sort of gaps. 6, arrogance or lack of self-awareness. And 7, our last red flag during an interview is poor conclusions. Now, let's go, Ronza, one by one, explain what the heck we mean by each of these. This could be in the context of someone, I don't know, applying to med school. This could be someone in the context of someone applying for a job, someone applying to whatever. It's just an interview. And I think this helps both people selecting and those being selected or interviewing for this, whatever position it is. And then, of course, at the end, let's see if I missed any of these. We obviously might have, like I said, some bonus red flags for you. So let's start with the first one, poor introduction. What the heck do we mean by somebody walking into an interview room, or it could be interview room like this, virtual? Poor introduction, what does that mean?
This is a great one. This is something that if you've watched any of our past videos, read our books, I mean, we always emphasize primacy effect, right? So, and that's typically that people remember the first few moments and the last few moments, which we'll discuss later on. So, for me, what I'm looking for here is someone that's personalizing introduction, being professional, introducing themselves. So, whether that's in person, that's a firm handshake, asking for your name. If they know your name, then, using it because it personalizes the connection. So I guess the red flag would be not doing any of this, right? Coming into an interview room, sitting down awkwardly, not saying hi, not showing enthusiasm. It sets the tone, and it's also it's really awkward on my end when it just doesn't have anything. It doesn't start strong. So yeah, that's how we really would summarize that.
Yeah, I agree. Like, that smile, handshake, if possible. Hello, how are you? Instead of being so weird, it's so important. Once you're weird, the first 5 seconds, the person is going to assume you're just totally weird. Even if you're not weird and being nervous, it just seems really weird. 2 is having those excessive amount of ums and like, and what's the issue with those, Ranza?
So I was a huge offender of this myself, and I've learned to navigate away from doing it. On the interviewer's side, as soon as they pick up on that, either they're picking up on someone that's not confident, that's nervous, but once you pick up on it, you almost cannot not hear it anymore. Like you start not even listening to their response because I'm just focusing on the ums or the ahs. It just really comes across as someone's not polished, not confident, and that might not even be the case. But that's how it can negatively impact how you're being perceived, is when you have those filler words, either someone just gets lost, it's distracting, or it comes across like you're not confident, you're not very professional. And, while I'm comparing you to the last candidate or the next candidate, you might not be as a strong, candidate in my eyes at that point, because, it just hurts your overall delivery.
Yeah, that's like, it's an immediate reaction to assume communication skills are not there. And
100%.
that's like the number one thing anybody looks for whatever you're applying for. Number three, sounding too political, beating around the bush, not answering questions. Instead of, the if someone doesn't know something, at the very least they should say, "Oh, that's interesting. Actually, I don't know." Instead of
And I
like
would
being
love that.
we've seen a lot of examples of these recently
Yeah.
as well. So I'm pretty sure you have some thoughts about this.
It's probably my biggest pet peeve in an interview, because if I'm being, if I'm creating a space where we're getting to know each other, I'm hoping you're going to be genuine and sincere. And if I have to ask it twice, that's me being nice. But if I have to ask it the third time and the fourth, and I'm still not getting an answer, either at that point, I'm realizing that you're being dishonest, or two, you don't have an opinion, which obviously, is an issue in another way, or, three, you're not conscientious. You're not realizing that you're still not answering again, going back to what you said, there's communication issue.
Yeah.
If you can't communicate directly, if I'm interviewing you for a job, how are you going to communicate if you're in a team? If, you're applying to dental school or, medical school, how are you going to interact with the staff and the patients? So it's being evasive is a red flag and a big pet peeve for me.
Same here. Like, the other thing is, if someone's asking you a technical question, which you should know about the job, and you don't, it actually makes it way worse when you keep beating around the bush, try to pretend you're clever and you know the answer, but it's so obvious you don't know what the heck you're talking about.
And I would appreciate if someone says, to be quite honest or transparent, I don't have that much knowledge in this topic. However, what I do know, it's like, okay. And I might even be like, yeah, myself too. I didn't know as much, but now we can kind of talk about what we do know.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
exactly. So that was number three. Red flag number four, blaming others for past poor performance, especially your past boss. Doesn't mean it cannot be possible, 100% possible. So this one is a little bit, I think we need to do a little bit of a if then sort of a situation.
Yeah.
Most of the time it is weird though. It's just a weird thing to say in an interview where you're trying to maintain a positive, vibe, right? It just
Absolutely.
gets awkward right away. Like, you're talking to your future boss, you're already shedding on your previous boss. They're like, oh man, I don't know about this. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's true. But I don't know. Is this why this person is going to talk about
Yeah.
this once this is over? So, Ronza, I don't know if you've had
This
this.
one can get pretty ugly. And for so many reasons, right? Like you just mentioned, when I've seen this, I mean, first you have to know why the question's being asked, whether it was directly asked, if there was a conflict. Obviously, we're trying to assess accountability, responsibility. How did you grow? How did you develop as a person? You want to maintain it to be positive. If you find ways to bring this up, I mean, that's another red flag. Like if I didn't directly ask you and somehow you're casting blame and you're not taking accountability, I'm thinking at that point there's resentment. This is someone that's not quite professional or open to feedback, depending on what the context was. Whether it's applying for a job or blaming a past professor on a project and a mark. So I think on the interviewer side, this is so detrimental, because it's, whether you're not growing as a person, open to feedback, You can't grow from something positively, even if it was a negative experience. You haven't grown from it. You're someone that holds resentments and grudges. You're someone that doesn't take accountability. Like there's so many things that you can take away from someone saying or directly mentioning a past boss in a negative light, or a past professor, or past anybody in a negative light.
Yeah, is it possible to have asshole of a boss or a colleague? Of course.
Yeah.
In fact, very possible for sure. But when this is put in the context of somebody blaming their own past poor performance on others, that's rare. Now that's rare. Why? Because then you're essentially saying my boss or colleague, held a gun to my head so that I perform poorly. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I've had candidates do this, and it's just so awkward. And you say, for example, well, you said you've done this, but then you're saying you didn't get really good at this. Oh, my boss didn't really let me. What does that mean? Your boss didn't let you? That makes no sense. Why wouldn't your boss not want you to do well?
I think it's all in the strategy, right? Like it's all in recognizing what you were responsible for. And like, you said you could have someone that was really mean, that was horrible. But even in that moment, recognizing, did you communicate? Did you try to come up with some sort of resolution? Or what did you learn from it? If you're like, it was an ugly experience, trust me, there's no way to twist this to be positive. Okay, that's fine. There's going to be circumstances in our life that are like that, unfortunately. But how did you grow from it? What did you learn? Let's focus on the positive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's go to red flag number 5: unconvincing, dishonest explanation for gaps. So gaps meaning, for example, resume has got empty gaps, or you're applying to a professional program and like you took a gap year, right? Just gaps. And when the person asks you, hey, what is this? What's going on here? Your explanation makes no sense. It's just dishonest. Like it could be as easy as, hey, you know what? I just felt like watching Netflix for a year. Like that answer more than somebody, again, not answering or just saying stuff that just doesn't make any sense. And more follow up, like you never get the answer.
Yeah.
It's just such a turn off. At least for me. Ronza?
I mean, it goes without saying, the person on the other side of the table or the screen, if it's an online interview, is just getting to know you, and getting to know your journey of how you've come to be where you are and why you're invested in that opportunity. Just be straightforward. I've actually loved when I heard past students say, I wanted to take a mental break and I wanted to confirm that this was the right decision for me. I think that it takes a certain amount of character and maturity to make those make those decisions. And even in a professional resume, someone saying I was burnt out and I needed to redirect my energy and I needed to kind of figure myself out. You have no idea what that conversation can turn into on the other end. That person could definitely resonate with you. They could say, wow, thanks for the vulnerability. Thanks for the honesty. Well, you could connect even more with that person. So I say, don't limit yourself and come across, just kind of like this cookie cutter answer, and just be honest. And of course, when I say that, I'm going to go back and say, be strategic. If there were certain things that were really personal, obviously you don't need to mention overly personal things. You could just mention them lightly, say what you want to say.
I think you could even say, if it's like that personal, it would be like, I had to take care of a personal matter. That's better than just BSing.
Yeah.
That will calm the person down, be like, okay, you know what? I don't want to dig deeper. Because I'll tell you, especially in a situation when you're applying for a job, you got gaps. People will assume immediately you're getting hired and fired. Hired, fired. So it's not in there. You've been there just short term. Like you've been getting fired back to back to back to back to back to back. That's what not one time. They're going to assume you've been getting fired back to back to back to back to back, because they're all short term. You don't want to show it. What if that is actually what's happening? Well, if that is what is actually happening back to back to back to back, where I'm going to go in a little tangent before we go into the rest of the red flags. You may want to look inside, because if you've gone to different organizations and different people who don't really know you have fired you, there is definitely something you're doing wrong. It is time to go and work on yourself and then reapply. And then, should you say you've been fired in a job interview? It is hard. It's a hard one. I'm not sure. It depends on the
Yeah.
job. Depends on the job. You might have to start a little bit, take a step back. Like, don't go to become a CEO of a company. Take a step back and then build yourself back up. So yeah, that's the only way you could. Some people won't care, like, because as the roles and responsibilities are lower, people actually less likely are even going to question about gaps. As you aim higher, more demanding of explanation, because they're giving you something that's got a sensitive, essentially a sensitive role or a huge impact on the organization. So they're going to have a lot of questions, and until they're convinced in the interview, you're not going to go past anywhere.
Yeah. And I think if it's the right person and the right match, and if explained correctly, like you mentioned, maybe you did have multiple situations where the partnerships ended and it doesn't look favorably, but you can genuinely say, I realized at that point I wasn't making the right career choices and I wasn't aligning myself with things I was passionate about, which what genuinely led to poor results. And I learned from that. And then I took some time off and then I evaluated myself. And I think to me, that would be so noble and be like, wow, what personal growth and honesty. Like, I would actually appreciate that.
Red flag number 6, arrogance, lack of self-awareness. I'll explain what I mean by that. And it's interesting because a lot of applicants don't realize they're being arrogant, and they're not actually arrogant when you meet them in person, etc. But this is so arrogant when somebody does that. Giving yourself high rankings when people ask you to rank. For example, somebody says rank yourself from 1 to 10 compared to everybody else. Oh, I'm a 10. Nobody's a 10. They're like, there is no 10. There should be only 110 in the world, right? You're comparing yourself with everybody else. 110, everybody else is like in between, and then you got 1 probably. 2, that's less likely people ask you about ranking in an interview. That's rare. What is common is the following scenarios: asking for unrealistic salaries or titles based on your experience. Like for example, the person has never been a director. They've been like a specialist somewhere, and now they say, okay, I want to be a director and I want my salary to jump by like 100,000. Well, that's just unrealistic. That doesn't make any sense. It means you don't understand your own limitations and your own strengths. Here's a very, very important one that I see as hugely arrogant: taking credit for the success of an entire organization. For example, I was a marketer and I helped grow the revenue by 500%. This can be said in a way where you were one part of the team, the entire revenue. Yes, that's okay. You helped with the rest of the team and contributed to the entire revenue, versus you saying it in a way that seems like you were the only person responsible for the entire company's revenue, or for the finishing this like huge project. You built a, school from scratch with your own bare hands. That's just unrealistic, and that means the person doesn't understand, and probably they're quitting that job because they're arguing with their boss that I should be the highest salary person in here because I'm doing everything, and not realizing that, oh man, there's like 500 other people helping. You could take credits for things you did yourself independently, yes, 100%, but not those like things that are entire organization level. I gave an example, such as revenue. That makes no sense. And somebody didn't understand it and said, what if you're a salesperson and you're doing sales? Yes, great. You're doing sales, but you have individual targets. Yes, that's great. You could mention that. But you don't make the entire company's revenue unless it's a one-man show. You're the owner, you're the salesperson, this doesn't make sense. Ronza, you have any examples of these ones? I don't know if you
no, I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's not even just the context for me. I think it's also in the delivery. People interrupting could come across very arrogant.
Yes.
Talking for a very long time.
Or correcting the interviewer.
Oh, yes, I've seen that too. But I mean, talking for a very long time, and I say that because some people could be nervous, and I'm always very forgiving. But if you see me trying to interrupt, or if like you're not being conscientious, at that point, you're just going on and on about yourself. I've had people chuckle at a question, kind of like, well, obviously, like, I don't know, that sarcasm just doesn't carry well in an interview,
No,
you guys.
it
We've
never
never
carries
met.
well.
We've never met. I don't know you. I don't know your humor. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, so I think everything you said, but more than context would also be delivery, I think.
100%. So I do have a bonus point about this arrogance where it actually could be good. I'll explain that at the end. Now let's go to our tip or red flag. It's not a tip. Red flag. Avoid these things. Number 7, poor conclusion. Ronza?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a full circle, right? We talked about the introduction. Now we're closing it out. Same concept. You want to finish strong. Good handshake. If you remembered the interviewer's name, even better, because that means you've paid attention, you've personalized the connection. And then again, be enthusiastic, be positive. People want to interact in a positive way, and they want to bring people on their team that are going to contribute to the energy. So same concept as introduction. Finish strong. That's going to
100%.
link.
100%. I agree with that. So let's go to our bonus tips. If you have any other ones, we could add as well. So I'm going to go to the arrogance thing. When can you be arrogant and get hired or accepted? Here's the only time you could be arrogant. I think this works probably only in terms of an employment opportunity, not necessarily applying to professional schools. I cannot find an example where this would work in a professional school setting. In an employment scenario, you could do the following. You could say during interview, hey, I've done this for a while. I know my capabilities. I understand the job. You've explained everything. I think I could absolutely kill this. So here is my offer to you. I'm going to come and work for the first X amount of weeks, absolutely for free, but I want a contract today. Your contract, you could put it in there that, I will give you X number of weeks for free. After that, if you want me to continue, or if I do such and such and show you demonstrable results, you start paying me at this amount. Fair enough? Right there and then you could end the interview, but you have to be able to actually do that. And the key is to be so confident that say that I'm willing to do it for X amount of time for free. If it doesn't work out, I'm out. You don't even need to pay me for training. You don't need to pay me for preparation. You don't need to pay me for anything. That's the key. That's the only time you could be arrogant, because it removes the risk from the other person completely. And they're like, this is cool. If they're smart, they'll be like, I have nothing to lose. Okay, come on in.
I would just add to that, read the room. If the interview hasn't been going well, and you haven't, if you haven't built a rapport with the interviewer, you know if you've been interviewing with someone, when you're building that rapport, it's a flowing conversation rather than an interrogation, then you could definitely interject that, but don't
And I should
misread.
also say this works mostly for jobs with a very obvious impact that the person doing the hiring can make a quick calculation. Example, sales. Example, marketing. I don't see that to be as easy to convince someone for other roles. It's a little bit different, and the impact of the person is not immediate for those roles. Other roles usually. So, but like you could do that for sales, you could do that for marketing, and it could be like, hey, you hire me. If I don't make you this much by this date, I'm gone. You don't have to pay me a penny. And you most likely will get hired. If the person is smart and they trust you just a little bit, and conversation has gone decent enough. You didn't do any of the other weird stuff that we talked about, hopefully. Any other points to add to this?
Yeah, I would say two other ones that could be categorized under one is basically the questions, not having questions prepared. To me, it just shows someone hasn't really invested. I just think if you're given an opportunity and this is something you're passionate about, whether that would be medical school or whether that's a dream job that you're landing, and you're essentially with the gatekeepers how do you not use and seize that opportunity to ask some question? Like, it's just baffles me when someone doesn't have a question about anything. And then the second part to that is when the types of questions you ask, when the only question you're asking is related to the income and it's related to any sort of extrinsic motivations. And that's how you end the meeting. And that's how you end that interview. I would say those two things. And again, it's kind of like that conclusion, right? Like if that's what I'm ending off in, you're not asking
kind of
anything
weird
else,
ending.
you're only asking about extrinsic, factors. I'm just like, okay, I know where this person kind of is really interested about.
It's
So.
like the person is like, applying to any job they see. So they don't really have questions because they apply to a million jobs. They're not really interested. Two, the only question they have is like, I just went to another interview 30 minutes ago. I have another one 30 minutes from now. Let me just pile these up based on money. Well, money is great. It's very important. But if that is the only thing you have question about, you're not going to do well. And usually if the person is experienced and it's a company that, has any impact or cares about its performance, you're not going to get fired. Now, like never. With
And
that kind of weird question, like, it's
yeah,
just, I don't know.
I know.
Obviously, it's the employer's job to talk about income at some point during the interview. I believe we do that. And I don't remember if we usually ask this before or after. Normally, actually, what we do is we actually talk about money before we ask the person, hey, do you have any other questions? So we don't actually get that a lot anymore. But I'm almost now tempted for us to switch this to see if we're gonna get that.
I know that's
There we go. Because it does say a lot about the person, and we always say actions speak louder than words.
well, that's it, right? So for me, I've had like mediocre interviews, and then when it gets to the line of question, I'm actually like really impressed. Either someone's really done their homework or they're really invested in the culture and the way they set up the question, their personality comes out more so in the end because they're all a little relieved too because the interview's over. So kind of like, feel more comfortable. But I've been more impressed sometimes by the question and someone's won me over by that. In addition to obviously everything else kind of aligning, but so it is important.
Any other bonus points?
I think that those are the main ones that come to mind.
Well, great. This was great. Thanks for your thoughts, everyone. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this as much as we enjoyed making it for you. If you did, share it with a friend who may need any sort of tips, either for hiring or their selection process, or maybe they're doing an interview somewhere. That's hopefully going to help them out. Also, make sure you subscribe on whatever social media channel you're watching this, and hopefully we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Take care.